My guest today is Chris Out. Chris is the author of the forthcoming book, Structuring for Extreme Revenue Growth, How to Quickly Monetize Your Biggest Business Opportunity. He co-founded, built, and exited the largest growth marketing agency in the Netherlands called RockBoost, and he's consulted hundreds of entrepreneurs on strategy, growth levers, and the right steps to profitably take their company to the next level. Chris, welcome to the Go for Launch podcast.
Thank you, Brandon. Great to be here.
Thank you. Well, I always start by asking, where are you in the world today?
I'm today in Amsterdam in the Netherlands.
Love it. What's the weather like today in Amsterdam?
Well, we got snow, so we have 10 centimeters of snow, so the entire country is derailed right now because we're not used to it.
Okay. Well, we're having a little bit of the same problem in the U.S. We're actually recording this in mid-February 2021. Weird weather all over the place. So, the southeast part of the U.S. is getting a lot of real cold weather right now as well. All right, well, let's jump right in because I know you're on a tight time frame today. And we're going to start talking about one of your favorite subjects as well as something I'm very interested in, which is growth hacking. Chris, for those who aren't familiar with that term exactly, what do you mean by when you say growth hacking?
Yeah, there are a lot of different nuances and explanations that a lot of people have used. I always try to say it's about rapid experimentation across the entire customer journey. So you really quickly understand what works and what doesn't. So you can double down on things that work and you can learn from things that don't work. And by doing that, you can massively grow your company.
All right. Well, how does that differ from people who are more used to traditional marketing and sales?
Well, in the old world, the traditional world, you could say when you're doing marketing and you're putting out billboards, for example, then you take a couple of months to create the campaign, put out the billboards, you have it out for a couple of weeks, and then after that, you get the results. In the new world where everything is digital, your product can be changed instantly when it's a software product. Your online marketing can be changed instantly when it's digital marketing. And of course, your customer experience can be completely digitized. So in the old world where everything was like fixed and you could only act on it after a couple of weeks, in the new world, you can quickly see what works and what doesn't. And therefore, you need to run a lot of experiments across the entire journey.
Yeah, I love that example of billboards. Man, I love to use that as well. Thanks, Chris, because, I always tell people like where we live, hey, you could go spend 15,000 US dollars a month on a billboard on this highway, and you really have no idea, how many people are seeing it or what kind of action they're taking on it. You're just getting the information from the billboard company. But like you said, you could take that money and do so much more with it digitally. So not to pick on the billboard industry, because obviously it's still around. It's still a thing. It does get some impressions, and obviously it's a thing, but it's more of a thing for people who own the property where the billboard signs live, not for the people actually taking the ads out on the billboards. Well, growth hacking, Chris, is actually kind of a relative phenomenon, relatively young, I should say. As a matter of fact, I looked it up, and the term was coined by a guy named Sean Ellis in 2010 after he used it to spark growth for companies that you may have heard of like Dropbox, LogMeIn, and Eventbrite, among others. So does growth hacking now apply to companies and industries beyond software, you think? And if so, can you give us some examples?
Well, I think that it was like a very important VC from Silicon Valley once said, every company will become a software company. So it's a way of thinking and a way of working that at some point we all need to adapt. And an example or a mechanism that I've coined is called a digital value ladder, a touch-based value ladder. And what I mean with that is that you can have products or services which are either human, so you deliver it through service. But what will happen is that you will add a digital layer to it. For example, when you do consulting, you can also send ebooks, for example, or automated emails. It's not that you're doing the service manually, but there is a digital layer. And every company and every service will have a digital layer at some point, either now or later in the future. So understanding that world will really help you to also get more growth.
Love that. Well, let me take one moment to be a contrarian, a little bit of a, skeptic, if you will. And I want your feedback on these two things. So on one hand, some people might say growth hacking, that doesn't sound really new to me. I mean, for decades, companies have looked for ways to sort of shortcut customer growth and experiment, things like that. On the other hand, other people also feel that growth hacking can feel a little bit manipulative and maybe even cheating. What do you say about critics or skeptics for either of those points?
Oh, it's a thing that we encountered a lot when we were trying to sell growth hacking to especially bigger companies, because I said, you know what, hacking is that are you breaking into my IT systems? But what I've always said is that hacking is all about like finding the weak spot in a system. It's really a mindset. How can we shortcut what we are doing? And to be completely honest, it hasn't adopted very well in a lot of bigger corporations, just because of the naming of the word.
Mm,
And there are a lot of examples where the hack was all about cheating or cheating and like leveraging what other people had built and then like stealing those customers. And what I always try to say is like you have like white hat growth hacking and black hat growth hacking, like
mm,
the good stuff and the bad stuff. And I've always tried to get it back to the principles. What can we learn from all those examples and trying to teach those principles to companies on how they can grow faster. So I understand your question. I think a lot of people are also right that some of the growth hacking examples are just bad examples of people who wanted to manipulate. But I think there are a lot of lessons and principles that you can use, which can actually help your customer and help you, and by that creating a win-win.
Yeah, I think one of the examples that comes to mind, and you might back me up on this, is Airbnb. I believe in the early stages, they figured out some kind of a little bit of a backdoor where they could actually glom onto Craigslist, which here in the United States is a humongous, sort of marketplace for people buying and selling and doing all, renting places or whatever. And so they were able to get away with that for a while, grabbing this massive database of people that they could, then enticed to go stay at an Airbnb. Are you familiar with that example? And do
There,
you think that was a little bit of a cheat at the time, maybe?
yeah, I definitely are familiar with that example. Actually, in every lecture that I do at the different business schools that I teach, this is one of the first examples that I always share. And what I also try to say is like, what's the principle behind what they were doing? They have tested all these things on what worked and what didn't work because there was no public API from Craigslist. They had to figure it out all themselves. They were using other people's network and see, okay, who has already built up that audience, who already has that trust, and how can we get them from that place to our place? So it's all about understanding who has access and who has the audience and what can you do with that. And I always start with that example, and then I actually ask the question, like, how ethical do you think that it is? And what you see is that the people that work at bigger companies actually say it's like unethical, and the people that work at startups, they're like, oh, this is cool. Like, we also need to figure this out. So I understand what you're saying, but I always say, okay, start from the principle and try to apply that to your situation. And what I've now done is I've created a cheat sheet, which is called a growth lever cheat sheet, where one of the growth levers that we explain is the Dream 100. So what you actually want to do is you want to figure out the 100 places where your ideal customer is already congregating. And can you build a relationship with that community owner or become present over there that actually because of the value you're providing into that community, that people come from there to you. And
Yeah, that
that's where you're actually doing the Craigslist hack from Airbnb, but in a more ethical way.
right. Yeah, it takes a little bit more work, obviously, blood, sweat, and tears to ingratiate yourself into a lot of different communities like that. But I love that. I think Russell Brunson at ClickFunnels also highly touts that top 100, Dream 100 type of approach as well. But another example for me, Chris, that comes to mind immediately is LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn, but LinkedIn is very private, very closed off with a lot of their information. So, for example, even if you're paying for a premium account, you don't get a good database of emails and things like that you can actually export. So it kind of sucks as a user, especially if you're paying. You think I should get this data, right? So there are now a lot of services out there that are kind of semi scraping the data out and stuff like that. So there's a lot of ethics around. Should I have access to this as a user? Yes. Should LinkedIn penalize me if I take it out? Maybe. Yes. No. I mean, they say, like you said, Chris, they're the big company saying, hey, this is bad. We own the data. Don't you dare scrape it out. But all these other hackers, if you are out there going, no, we're going to figure out a way. Even if you don't give us an API, we'll figure out a way to get in there and get the data out, right? So is that something that you've dealt with, situations like that with LinkedIn
Well,
or
well,
others?
well, people think that those LinkedIn hacks are really sexy and they have these scraping tools and everything. But what I, for example, try to do is when somebody signs up for my email list, I connect with them on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
And why is that? Because they unsubscribe from my email list, but then I still have access to them on another platform.
Mm.
So what I think that you should do is like once you have access to somebody on a platform, try to figure out which information can I extract from the access that I already have to also get access to them on other platforms. Because once you have access to them on 2 or 3 or 4 platforms, it means that they can unsubscribe on one platform, but you can still put out your content, show value, and still continue that relationship. And at the end, the money is always in the relationship. And once they see you adding value, they will buy from you either now or in 10 years.
Yeah, that's a great point and a great tip. Thank you, Chris. Again, if anybody's listening, so you get somebody on your email list, eventually a lot of people do unsubscribe, and it may not be personal to you. It's just the fact that they're like, you know what, I'm cleaning house. I don't need to be on all these different email lists. Unsubscribe to a bunch of them, right? But if they're connected to you on LinkedIn or elsewhere, Chris made a great point. You can then get back in touch with them through other means. So that's awesome. And now I want to get back to more of the positive spin because this is all about growth hacking for good reasons. And you got a new book out, and I want you to talk about how can growth hacking lead to extreme revenue growth.
Yeah, so in the new book, which I'm still writing, by the way,
All right.
I'm growth hacking that process. So what I've done right now, if like I've shared with the world that I'm going to write that book, it's also some kind of public accountability because I know that if I don't write it, people will say like, Chris, like with your big mouth, like when is the book coming? So it's definitely helping. And what I'm trying to do with this book is to find the hidden gold mine that is in front of you, because I believe that every business has a hidden gold mine in front of them. And I'm describing a process on how you can find that. So looking at the access that you already have, looking at the audience that you already have, how to build a value ladder, either with low touch or high touch. But also what a lot of people are missing out on is that they don't let growth be easy. And what do I mean with that? There is a customer segment that buys like crazy from you, that it costs you very low touch and very low effort to serve them. And there are probably a lot of more out of them, but you're not hunting them down. You're not aggressive enough. You're not going after them. And the customers that are complaining and which aren't adding a lot of value to your business, they get a lot of attention. So with a lot of engagements that I do, I try to figure out who are your top 3 earners and your top 3 burners. Because if you double down on clients that are making you money and you just scrape the other ones away, then you can make growth a lot easier. And another thing where I'm trying to end the book with, it's where I'm saying like tap into the hidden gold mine of growth. Slack, for example, they started as a gaming company and they made 27 billion by selling as a communication tool. Mm-hmm. And what's the principle behind that is that you can put something out there which you like, but eventually the market maybe wants something else. And what I want to try to show with my book is how do you build up all those ingredients that if you combine them and listen to the market really well, that you can tap into gold mines, which you didn't see before, and where you can actually make the most money.
Yeah, Slack's a great example. I'm a huge Slack fanboy. And I could just imagine those days where they were like dejected trying to think, oh, no one wants this video game. But man, this thing we made to communicate with ourselves internally is kind of cool. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's such a great example. Thank goodness for their sake, right, that they had something else going on, because we always hear, and that's the thing about growth hacking, like you said early in the conversation, Chris, it's a way to very quickly experiment and figure out what's working and what's not working. So the good news is you can use growth hacking to figure out what we're doing is not working, but to pivot to something that is working is a bigger challenge. Can you talk about that? When you were working with RockBoost, for example, and other experiences you've had where you've gotten to those early experiments to go, man, this just isn't working. What do we need to do next? What does that take, Chris? Does it take everybody stop for a week and let's do a big giant brainstorming session and figure out stuff and throw it on the table? Or how do you pivot from the, not, being underwater, not working, to getting to something that's profitable?
So there are a couple of things that you need to do. I think the biggest mindset that you need to have is the market will tell you what they want. So step 1 is try to figure out how is the market already reacting to the things that I'm putting out there. Which products are they buying? Where do I see an upward trend? Or which things am I trying to promote, but people aren't buying? And by having that insight, that already gives you insights in which experiments you need to run. Should we push more of those products? Should we cater more to that audience? And then it's still asking questions. And what I'm a big fan of is pre-selling. So I try to sell a lot of things before I even create them. Like with this book, I just described you the book, but I know one thing for certain, that in 1 month it will be different.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because I'm still in the pre-selling stage. I'm still trying to sharpen the story, see where people react to, what they like, what they don't like. And I think if you practice what you preach and you keep doing that, once people will lean in and say, you know what, you didn't create it yet, but that's what I want, then you know that you can already charge people for that. And then with that money, create something and then add that value to them. So it's all about listening to the market, and it can be either be with products or services. And there are tons of examples out there. I think a great book that describes this really well is Start from Zero from Dane Maxwell. He has a lot of examples on how people have actually done this, and I'm a huge fan of that. So that's also something that I would highly recommend people to check out.
Yeah, I'm sitting there thinking about a landing page, Chris, where it's like, "Hey, Chris out here. My new book is, awesome. And here, click here to get the first 3 chapters for free," right? And people fill it out, and then they get a page that says, "Thank you so much for your interest. I'm still writing the book. However, you'll be the first in line to know, and you'll get the free chapters as soon as they're written." You know what I mean? So it's like you said,
Yeah.
Chris, that's a classic growth hack where you didn't do any work yet, but you can put that form out there, maybe throw some ad money towards it, and figure out, do you get 10 people that sign up for that, or do you get 10,000 people? Somewhere in between. Like, you're going to validate, wow, seems like a lot of people are interested in this topic, and yeah, now I got to sit down and actually write the thing or build the product or whatever. So that's a great example.
And the best ideas didn't come from me yet, but from people that I spoke to, who I spoke to and told them, like, you know what, this is kind of the concept that I want to go to, and then they mentioned the word. I was like, whoa, that's actually a very good angle. So I know I'm not going to write the book myself. I'm co-creating it with feedback from a lot of people who also have a lot of knowledge, and that actually makes it very valuable.
I love that. Well, let me ask you a hypothetical. Let's say I have a small consulting company. Maybe I'm offering accounting services or something like digital marketing. What are some steps that you would recommend to that person to take to start growth hacking?
Yeah. So what I always try to do is, like, are you already getting the maximum output of what you're currently doing? So that's like, it's the first phase is all about exploiting. So have you templated everything? Are there processes? Are there systems that if a client comes in, you can predictably get them in and make them a really happy client that where you make money on, and which also will refer new clients? And if that's the case, then you've got money to test all kinds of different things. So you can test new channels or see, like, partner with people. There are all kinds of ways that you can do that, but it's all dependent on the context that somebody is in. But that's the second phase, that's exploration. So I always say, first try to maximize what you're doing right now by doubling down on what works and stop doing the things that don't work. And then explore with a small part of your budget new things. And then if something works, try to figure out what the pattern is behind that and then double down on that.
That's great. Now, Chris, you had a great success where you were able to build a multi-million-dollar, or in your case, euro business from scratch. Is that something that you think is repeatable, or were you at the right place at the right time?
Both.
Okay,
So
good answer.
I was at the right place at the right time. And why was that? Because there was in 2014, as you said, like, growth hacking was developed by Sean in 2010. Growth hacking wasn't known in Europe, but it was already known in the US. And what's the principle? What's the pattern that you see is that things that become a hype in the US will eventually also come to Europe. So I thought, okay, how can I tap into that wave that's coming? And that was the growth hacking wave. And by doing that, I really believe that 95% of your success is being on the right wave at the right time. And then it's just doing the smart thing, automating things, standardizing things, learning from what works and what doesn't. So that's also definitely going to be a very important principle in my book. It's like, how do you spot the waves that are coming?
Mm-hmm.
And also, how can you double down on that? Because if you're now stuck on growth, like, the market is constantly changing, people are constantly changing, there are always new waves coming. So if you take a step back and see, okay, which wave should I catch on next? That can be the base for a very strong growth in the coming 2 years.
How was that when you started RockBoost in the Netherlands? You know, it was a new thing. Were you like the crazy preacher in the square trying to tell everybody this is the greatest thing ever and trying to educate them? Or were people pretty excited early on saying, hey, something new, we'll try that? Which, you know, was
Well,
the defining
the
moment?
the interesting part is, especially in the beginning, the people that already know it are actually the crazy ones
Right.
who you don't want to work with, because
Okay.
they either have like sketchy businesses or like
Uh,
business models that didn't work, and they were like, okay, we need to growth hack this. Um, and other people who had solid businesses where you came into and said, we're going to do growth hacking. And when they didn't know about it, they were like, okay, what is this? So there was really a lot of fear. But I think the moment that we figured out, okay, we need to start educating people, and after that education, do consulting, that worked really well. But what's also happening is that we had where everybody thought a competitor who was doing only growth hacking courses. Actually, that was really beneficial for us because a lot of people got trained into the subject, and then they saw, okay, we can't do it ourselves. We need an agency to help us with it. So that's also something that, if you look at competition, competition can also be a huge leverage for your growth if you see what they are building and how you can jump on top of that.
Yeah, another great point because a lot of people are scared of competition. In your case, because you were kind of new, you know, early on it, and I was like this years ago when I started one of the first web development firms in this area, and you know, for a while we were like had this ocean to ourselves, right? We could just charge whatever we wanted and all that, and it was great. And all of a sudden, all these competitors started coming in, and it was like, ooh, all right. But the good news was, like you said, they started educating people. They were spending money teaching people what web design was about. They were also doing work that we didn't think was as good in most cases. So we were able to say, you know what? Yeah, you can go work with those guys, but their work sucks, right? Compared to ours. And we also had some competitors that started doing work as good or better than ours, which made us have to step up our game. So all the way around, competition was actually a great thing. So, you know, it's the
Definitely.
same thing as like, that's the reason why a restaurant wouldn't just go plop a location on a corner in the middle of nowhere. It's going to be in the same mall or strip or whatever with 17 other restaurants because that's where people go to eat, right?
Yeah.
They're not all going to go to your restaurant that day, but because they're going to see you and they go, yeah, you know, next time we're going to go to Chris's restaurant because we've been to Brandon's twice now or whatever. So it's good stuff. Well, I want to ask you another question as we start to wrap up here. How can somebody, Chris, turn personal growth into business growth?
So the another chapter that I have in my book is called "Every Level Has a New Growth Level." And what I mean with that is that I've seen a lot of businesses grow, and at some point, growth was stalling. And why was that? Because the owner or the management couldn't handle the pressure or basically the new things that they had to do at that point. And it's another great book is about the leadership pipeline. And what you see is when you start a business, you're doing it on your own. Then you have to manage a couple of people, and then the team becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And then you need to start manage managers. And these are all things that require new skills and especially new mindsets. So what I believe is when I talk about like turn personal growth into business growth, is that you need to grow yourself, because if you don't grow yourself in terms of mindset and mental models and capabilities, then at some point that will also block your business growth.
Oh, wow. That's a great point. So you got to get cracking on writing this whole book, Chris, so we can all read it soon enough. So speaking of that, where can people go and learn more about you and also sign up to get notified
Yeah.
when the book is available?
Yeah. So they should go to chrisout.com and download the growth lever cheat sheet that is already there. And one of my next action steps that I need to do is get that page live where I announce the book, because I'm all about fast action. So I've put it out there and within my network, and now I start to promote it. So I'm like, okay, shit, I need to make sure that I put that page also on. So
Yeah,
when
sorry.
people go there, that page will definitely be there.
Yeah, sorry. I think I made you have to create a landing page opt-in form today, but that's a good thing,
But
right?
that's good. The market is telling me what they want.
Yeah, absolutely. So all of these links will be over at the show notes page at goforlaunch.io/show 124. Or also you can visit Chris Out, which is ChrisOut.com. to check out the resources that Chris just mentioned. Well, Chris, thank you so much. I wish you all the best on getting that book written. I've done it myself when I wrote Podcast Away, so I know the grind of having to sit there in a quiet room by yourself writing. But man, it's awesome once that book gets out there.
Definitely, I'm really looking forward to it. And thanks, Brennan, for your time and your attention and the great questions. And I'm looking forward to stay in touch.